You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 43, The Posse. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green.
Each week on Gene-ology, we round up a posse of facts and trivia points to provide you a better insight into the early work of Gene Roddenberry. We're looking for the kinds of morals, meanings, and messages that would become part of his most famous creation, Star Trek.
This week, we're trying to crack a case, exact justice, and figure out just why Paladin gets bushwhacked so often.
Or we'll be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here's how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at missionlogpod. While you're at it, leave us a rating or review at Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology, so say something nice. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, go for it, friend.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I am just sitting here under this one tree of trivia the whole time waiting for this moment. The Internet Movie Database ranks The Posse as one of the top-rated episodes of Have Gun, with a current score of 8.6 after 103 votes. The Posse is the third highest-rated episode of the series on that site. Our producer for The Posse is show creator Sam Rolfe, who worked with Gene on West Point and would go on to write one episode each of Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Film editor Sam Gold would also work with Gene on The Lieutenant. Our players this week are Perry Cook as Dobie O'Brien, Denver Pyle as McKay, Harry Carey Jr. as the Sheriff, and Ken Curtis as Curly. This is Ken's first appearance in Have Gun, and he would go on to appear in 4 more episodes of the series, but no others performing a Gene script. Ken would spend most of his acting career working in TV westerns. Hello, Gunsmoke, he was a regular there, with the occasional detective or cop show worked in. However, modern audiences might best know Ken as the voice of Nutsy in Disney's 1973 animated classic Robin Hood. We lost Ken in 1991. Perry Cook makes his third Have Gun appearance as Dobie O'Brien in today's show. Perry appeared in Have Gun a total of 9 times, playing 9 different characters across 5 seasons of the show. Perry worked steadily in TV from the late 50s through the early 70s, taking a break from the biz in 1972, only to return to the screen in the mid to late 70s. Perry is probably best known as Barney in 29 episodes of the long-running cop show Hunter, which ran from 1985 to 91. He'd also make an appearance in the pulp film favorite The Rocketeer, where he would play a good old boy alongside Billy Campbell, a.k.a. the outrageous O'Connor, from the Star Trek The Next Generation, Lower Decks, and Prodigy fame, Billy Campbell. We'll see Perry again when we discuss the Have Gun Season 5 episode Alice. Denver Pyle has 7 credits on Have Gun, though this is his only Gene script. Denver had a long career working in TV and film, beginning in 1947 and up until his death in 1997. Denver is probably best known for his work in 146 episodes as Uncle Jesse on The Dukes of Hazzard, and as the patriarch of the Darling clan, Briscoe Darling, in 6 episodes of The Andy Griffith Show. While this is his only Gene script for Have Gun, he would appear in 1 episode of another Gene show, The Lieutenant. We'll meet him again when we cover that series. Rounding out our main cast is prolific film and television actor Harry Carey Jr., making his third of 12 appearances in Have Gun. We've seen Harry once before in our coverage of Have Gun as the dastardly sheriff of Bluebell in The Road to Wickenburg. We'll discuss Harry again in the Have Gun Season 6 episode, Taylor's Woman. Our posse men for this episode are Paul Sorensen, William Wellman Jr., and Richard Boone stuntman Hal Needham. We've seen Paul once already as Pete in Maggie O'Banion, and we'll see him again next week in our discussion of The Golden Toad. He would appear in another show that Gene wrote for, Highway Patrol, though not in one of Gene's scripts. His other Gene connection is his appearance in Star Trek III The Search for Spock as the captain of the merchantman ship. William Wellman Jr. appeared in 4 episodes of Have Gun, with this being his first. William would have a long career in film and television, and a Star Trek credit as well. He would play a Bajoran officer in the Season 6 episode of Deep Space Nine, Favor the Bold. He has one more appearance in our discussion of Have Gun next week in The Golden Toad. Hal Needham needs no introduction to listeners of Gene-ology, where he would serve as Richard Boone's stuntman throughout the series and appear in 49 episodes in various roles, though this is his last appearance with lines in a Gene Roddenberry script.
Act 1. Paladin is riding along when he stops to cool off at a stream. He notices a group of men on horseback in the distance, but thinks better of approach. Once he's poured a hatful of water on himself, he's back on the road. A bit further up a piece, he encounters a horse and a man in the bushes. The man points his rifle at Paladin, claiming, "Hey, you scared me." Paladin eyes the man suspiciously, but asks for directions to the trail to Santa Fe. The man dodges the question and instead encourages Paladin to bed down here for the night, citing the good grass for his horse and the late hour. Paladin still gives the man a suspicious eye, but allows him to assist in setting up camp, unsaddling his horse and making a good cup of coffee. After all, the man is just trying to make friends. This man slips a knife in the holster of Paladin's saddle while Paladin is starting the fire. Over coffee, the man, Dobie O'Brien, tells Paladin the Cliff's Notes version of his life story. He's been kicked around all of his life. No one showed him any kindness. Paladin takes it all in, still suspicious of his new acquaintance. In the distance, a posse of men are riding towards their position in a rather excited manner. Dobie mentions, "Oh, by the way, I killed a man and woman this morning. Those guys are after me." Paladin gives Dobie the biggest WTF face of his life, picks up his rifle, and approaches the posse. As he's doing this, Dobie has managed to tie his own hands, has slumped over, purposefully smashing his head to give himself a good bump on the noggin. Dobie then gets up and claims Paladin killed the people in question. Dobie had been following him, but Paladin got the jump on him and roughed him up. Without question, the posse turns on Paladin, taking the rifle from him and identifying it as the murder weapon. When Paladin protests, they think he protests too much, and he gets a clobbering with a rifle, courtesy of Curly, one of the posse who is rather eager for some bloodshed. After all, isn't that what they came here to do? Paladin is knocked out from the bludgeoning. Curly's hand is stayed by the sheriff, who reminds him that this is a legal posse, and that's the way it'll be run. He doesn't want to make any mistakes here. Mr. McKay, the accuser in this scenario, says, "Well, that's what I'm here for, to make sure you don't." Dobie looks on the scene with disturbingly demented glee. Act 2. Paladin is covered in water again, this time courtesy of the posse. He's awake, and he needs to be, because the posse is ready to hear Dobie's side of the story. And maybe Paladin's, if he's interested in telling it. The majority of the posse takes Dobie's account at face value. Dobie says he stopped to water his horse at the Willis's place, found them dead, and their money stolen. He pursued Paladin, who then overtook him, tied him up, and gave him the goose egg on his forehead. When Paladin asks that they present evidence of his crime, they take his business card and wallet of cash as reason enough, even though the amount of money differs from what was stolen. Dobie then claims he knows ways to make Paladin talk, with all too much glee in his voice. Paladin then reminds them that they are effectively becoming a lynch mob rather than a, quote, legal posse. The sheriff seems to be out for truth, but is unwilling to exert much authority over the rest of the posse, who seem to be out for blood. To this, Paladin quotes Herodias' second essay, saying, "And in anger, our lips shall form the truth." Paladin says he's got something to say, but only to the man who is in charge, and that's clearly not the sheriff. It's McKay, and he'll say it to McKay, but only if McKay is willing to listen. Act 3. Looks like the goose is cooked and hanging high, or at least he will be soon unless the posse can be swayed. McKay gives his reasons for not allowing Paladin to be taken back into town for a fair hearing. That's simply not how he does things. It'll take too long and he has cattle to drive. Besides, all these same men would sit on Paladin's jury anyway. Let's just save some time and string him up here. After all, we're good people doing what we gotta do. Paladin responds saying, and in his third essay, Herodias said, we contend with the evil that men do in the name of evil, but heaven protect us from what they do in the name of good. Paladin's words and even the evidence he's presented isn't good enough for McKay. They string him up and put him on horseback so they can get it over with. McKay, who is quite eager for a hanging, isn't willing to watch the hanging and turns away. Paladin manages to get his head out of the noose just in time for them to crack the switch on the horse's back. Paladin rides off, narrowly escaping. Curly picks up the rifle to shoot Paladin when Dobie remarks about the hairspring on the gun. How would he know that? Unless it's his gun? Dun dun dun! Dobie realizes that he's just shot himself in the foot with his broken gun and given the hangman a new pair of boots. Two of the posse ride out after Paladin, bringing him back so he can see what they've discovered. Dobie unearths the stolen money from beneath the tree, and he might as well keep digging. McKay apologizes to Paladin and offers him his hand to shake. There was obviously no way he could have known Paladin was innocent. Paladin gives him a sharp look of derision and just asks for directions to Santa Fe. He reminds McKay, just remember that what you do today, you'll deal with the rest of your life. As Paladin rides off, he hears Dobie pleading for his life, and then the crack of the switch on the horse's back. Dobie is dead, but Paladin doesn't look happy about the justice Dobie has received. He sighs and says, heaven help us from what men do in the name of good. The end.
Excellent job, Ashley, with the recap.
Thank you, friend.
We have ways of making you talk. I don't know how that is more threatening, in kind of a redneck drawl or in vaguely Eastern European.
I feel like, me personally, I lean the redneck draws a little scarier, mostly just because it makes me think of Deliverance.
Okay, fair point.
And I'm more scared of Deliverance than I am Eastern European accents, I guess.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, I can buy that. That is a perfectly valid viewpoint there. I have one piece of advice for Paladin. Just keep moving, buddy.
Yeah. As much side-eye as he was giving Dobie the whole time, you would think he's just like, you know what? I'm just going to keep going. Bye.
I'm trying to think of a single time that noticing odd activity involving other horsemen has ever worked out in Paladin's favor. And every scenario that I can think of that we have covered in the episodes we've talked about basically involves Paladin getting rolled for his lunch money.
Yeah.
I realize there is no show if Paladin doesn't go sticking his nose into other people's business. But at a certain point, it starts looking like a distinct lack of common sense. And I think that certain point is like the 3 seasons in.
Yeah. I can appreciate Paladin is maybe trying to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. But he is very clearly suspicious of him the whole time. He's like, I don't know how I feel about this guy. And I was like, bro, if you got that icky feeling, you need to go on your way.
Like I said, you don't get 39 episodes a year out of Paladin going with his gut and saying, yeah, you know what? Maybe this week I don't do that thing.
Yeah.
One thing I have noticed, and I noticed this first in episode in Laredo, but I also noticed it here. Richard Boone's vocalizations for Paladin getting beaten up remind me bizarrely of Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, because it just comes out as whack. It's just like, yeah, it's like, that's the sound of Paladin going down? Okay. Didn't expect that. Exactly.
Yeah, that is not something I had thought of before, but now I will not be able to unhear it, so thank you for that.
Yeah, just keep listening for it, as Paladin inevitably sticks his neck out in future episodes, because, he's not going to stop doing that.
Nah.
When he gets rolled for his lunch money again.
Watching it's something silly, but watching this first opening segment where Paladin stops at the stream, dips his hat in the stream, puts it back on his head full of water. I have definitely done that before, although it doesn't work quite as well with a baseball cap.
I used to have this great big, I think it was called a ranger hat. Had a really wide brim. Mm-hmm. There were numerous places where you could button it up to the sides if you wanted to, but I just basically wore it as the manliest granny hat possible back in my days of feeding horses. And I can totally relate to maybe not a random stream with random bacteria, but we used to have plumbing in the barn to draw water for the horses. Yeah, I totally stuck hats, shirts, you name it, under that. Got them sopping wet and cold. Cold was really the key. And then putting that back on. Yeah,
definitely. Growing up in the South, I feel like that's kind of a thing that you do, especially if you have to be outdoors quite a bit during the summer.
Yeah, it's a must. So you learn these coping strategies. So yeah, that's that struck me as very familiar. Now, in Act 2, when Paladin comes to, he's regaining consciousness. I really appreciated that Richard Boone was doing some business, some actor business, selling that getting knocked out didn't feel so great, and he's having a little bit of a hard time coming back from that. Trying to shake it off, trying to get his eyes to focus, trying to get his bearings. I did appreciate that, and I also feel like Boone deserves some plaudits for being okay with showing Paladin in that light and not insisting that he has to be just this side of invulnerable.
Yeah. Nobody's going to be feeling good about getting pistol whipped with a rifle.
Yeah, not at all.
Not in the slightest. Not with that heavy wood stock. No thanks.
And, of course, Hollywood history is replete with instances of leading men who were like, oh no, I don't want to be seen going down like a chump like that. And so I'm glad that Boone is selling some of the reality that goes with the abuse that character takes all too frequently from sticking his nose into other people's business. Sorry, I can't let that go.
Yeah, nope. I thought there was a little bit of interesting symmetry, and it doesn't quite work, so I guess it's not symmetry, but Paladin starts Act 2 covered in water again. Is he trying to win a wet t-shirt contest or the cowboy equivalent of that? It's not working very well. He's wearing all black, for one thing, so it doesn't work. I just thought the idea of Paladin trying to win a wet t-shirt contest was really funny. So, you're welcome for that idea.
Delete mental_image.jpg. Oh, no, it's not working. Now, the funny thing is, I'm glad that we established that there is a stream nearby because we stay in one place for this whole episode. And you remember in episode in Laredo, I was all about Gene being really smart for writing a half-hour script that all takes place in the same room. This is kind of the out-on-location version of that. Hey, Gene, we found a really nice tree out in the hills in Lone Pine. Remember when you did that episode about the hotel in Laredo? Do it again, but with a tree.
Yeah, no, and that worked really well. They did a good job of utilizing the space, and I mean, it makes sense where, we're a lynch mob. We need a good place to hang someone. Well, oh, good. We found you next to this really big tree. Here we go.
Yeah. Now, that scene where Paladin's head is in the tightened noose, that was kind of terrifying.
Absolutely.
But then, a couple of seconds later, he starts squirming out of it. He is moving all over the place trying to get that back off of his neck and off of his head. Is no one watching him do this?
Well, I noticed that McKay wasn't. He turned around to face the tree. Like, the dude is out for blood, and he's not even willing to watch the hanging that he is insisting upon.
Yeah, but these other guys, I mean, they're there to see a hanging happen today.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, maybe they're preoccupied with trying to keep Paladin from wiggling off the horse or something, but no, he's able to escape. And, they do make a comment, I noticed earlier in the episode, they make a comment about how the guy who's tying the noose, now you almost lost that one guy last time, so, you tie it better this time. So maybe, we're getting the setup for, oh, well, the noose isn't tied properly.
Yeah, I just found it surprising that these guys are here for the main event, and then they take their eyes off of him. Or, as you pointed out with McKay, it's like he can't look.
Yeah.
It's like, bro, you got a weak stomach for this now?
Like, you're so adamant that, somebody's gonna hang today, and it's like he doesn't even care who. Because, obviously he's not willing to listen or test any of what Paladin said to find out whether or not it's true.
Right.
And now he's just like, just in case that he's made a mistake, he's not willing to actually watch the follow-through of his decision-making.
It's like Paladin puts him on blast. You are all going to have to live with this for the rest of your life if you go through with it.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong.
Nope.
That being said, I was a little surprised when they brought Paladin back alive. I mean, I'm not surprised in the sense that Richard Boone's in the credits. This is his show. I know he's not going anywhere. I know Paladin's not going anywhere. But just on a common sense level, it's like, whoa, they brought him back alive. It's not like the sheriff had any way of telling them, it's the 1870s. They're not carrying cell phones. He can't call them up and say, oh, boys, bit of a clerical error, minor mix-up here, just bring him back alive. No, you'd think they'd be out for blood, because they were out for blood 30 seconds before that.
I mean, the only possible thing I can think of is, the sheriff being adamant that this is a legal posse, and we're trying to do things the right way. Curly was the most bloodthirsty one, and he at least stayed back with Dobie because he was the one going to shoot Dobie's gun.
Yeah.
And finding out that, you need to do this special thing to shoot that gun. Oh, wait, how do you know that? This ain't your gun. Or is it? That's the only thing I can think of, but yes, I was surprised by that as well.
And now we're venturing into territory that forms much of my notes for the rest of the show once we get out of the funsies. But Curly was an interesting character. It was interesting seeing Ken Curtis in that role because I grew up on reruns of this show and Gunsmoke, where Ken Curtis was Festus. He was in like 300 episodes of that show as Festus. And he was usually, I hate to bring up the phrase mostly harmless, but it kind of fits that character. And so it was kind of interesting seeing him being so bloodthirsty here.
I think my knowledge of Ken Curtis extends to Nutsy from Robin Hood. So obviously that's wildly different.
Even more of a shock.
Yeah. Still a bit on the bloodthirsty side there, but kind of an idiot.
Oh, he was still kind of an idiot here, too, but...
yeah, absolutely.
But more on that later, and we do mean moron. Ashley, I'm sure we both have quite a few thoughts on this. This feels like it's kind of a piece with episode in Laredo.
Yes, it is. I think it's interesting how in the Gene scripts that we've discussed so far, we have a pretty heavy or serious episode, and then we have a lighter episode, and then we have another heavy or serious episode. There seems to be Gene needs what a friend of mine calls a unicorn chaser in between some of these harder hitting episodes. Well,
and if you come across as someone who is, whether intentionally or not, writing the same story over and over again, that's not... I wouldn't think that would be a good ingredient for a screenwriting career. You gotta have some variance in there. You have to have some range. You expect the cast to have some range. It's not unreasonable to expect the writers to have similar range. Speaking of writers, we have Paladin quoting a Greek orator, Greek historian here. In the show, it sounds like he's saying Herodias or Herodias.
Yes, and the captions that I used said Herodias, and I'm realizing, oh, wait a minute. I am not familiar enough with Greek philosophers to realize Herodias was not a real dude. So, my bad.
If these are the messages of this week's episode, and I know we're getting to that awfully early, I approve. It holds up pretty well. The two quotes in particular that Paladin rattles off to his captors. The first one is, "And in anger our lips shall form the truth." The other line, I think this is possibly the more important one. "We can contend with the evil that men do in the name of evil, but heaven protect us from what they do in the name of good." That feels like a very strong contender for being the whole point of the story here.
Yes.
None of the men who are ready to hang Paladin have any interest in hearing him out. He brings the sheriff up short a little bit, but it's also very obvious that the sheriff, ironically, is not in charge. McKay is calling the shots here, and the sheriff is, for whatever reason, if you want to assign it to social status, money, corruption, the sheriff is basically his lapdog for much of this story. The fact that Paladin is as calm about it all as he is doesn't faze them at all. The posse is, they've gone feral. They're out to shed somebody's blood, and they just really stopped caring about whose. They thought they were setting out to deliver justice, but they have stopped taking on any outside information, and as a result, they are not listening to any evidence that they might be wrong. And whether you call that a mob mentality or a herd mentality, that's a dangerous thing. Especially once you have someone who has emerged as a figurehead, expecting to be followed, expecting his orders to be listened to and obeyed. Even if it's something that started out for honorable reasons, even the most well-intentioned mob can be co-opted, and the idea can be perverted, especially once someone has convinced everyone to stop doing the gut check to see if this feels right or wrong. And these guys have all stopped doing the gut check.
Yeah. Earl, it makes me think of the film Halloween Kills. So, have you seen Halloween Kills, Earl?
I have not, but it put me, ironically, because all roads for me tend to lead to Doctor Who, it reminded me of the episode Midnight.
Ah, okay.
Which was written by Russell T. Davies, and to a certain extent, Russell T. Davies rewrote that story and blew it out to 5 episodes as the 3rd season of Torchwood, where a lot of people supposedly trying to do the right thing start doing the wrong things, and they stop listening to anyone telling them, you know what, that might not be the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that Gene is trying to address here is a problem that many writers have latched onto.
Yeah. Yeah.
That needs to be flagged for the audience and get them to think about it before they too join that kind of a movement.
Yeah. And so for those in the audience who may not know, I love horror movies. Halloween franchise is my favorite horror franchise. Because part of it is because I just love John Carpenter's directorial work so much. He's my favorite director. Now, I really loved Halloween 2018. I was middling on Halloween Kills, at least until I saw the 3rd in the reboot trilogy for Halloween Ends. Now, while I'm still kind of middling on Halloween Kills, what I thought was really fascinating about that movie is that you find yourself in the audience cheering for a lynch mob. Because they're like, evil dies tonight. We're going to go get Michael Myers. We're going to go take him out. And then, just like you said, we see that, oh, wait, yes, good intent. Because, that's the whole point of Michael Myers. There's absolutely no good in him. He is the embodiment of evil, and he has to be taken out. Because there's no fixing him. There's no curing him. There's no help for him. Okay? So, yes, lynch mob, they are feeling righteous. in their anger and in their pursuit of him. This lynch mob ends up getting an innocent person killed because they think he's Michael Myers. And it's horrible. And it shocked me so deeply because I'm like, oh snap, I'm subconsciously cheering along for the lynch mob until I see, wait a minute, that's not Michael they're chasing. Oh crap, what have we done? And this is the exact same thing. These guys think they're doing the right thing. We're good people trying to do right here, is what McKay says.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're good people trying to do what we gotta do. Because the justice system is too slow. And I feel for McKay because he's like, I lost a son because some dingus poisoned the water supply. He poisoned my water. I got a son in the ground to prove it. Then we had the Indians and the outlaws and blah, 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 blah. And like, he just keeps going about, I had to deal with all of this stuff to make a place for myself here, and nobody helped me. Justice was too slow. And so he is seeing himself as the arm of justice. And he's got the sheriff there with him. What I found concerning is that the sheriff didn't have backup. It was just the sheriff and McKay and his buddies. And these guys are clearly out for blood. Even if the sheriff pushed back harder, he is outnumbered like 6-1. He's going to get himself shot.
Yeah, I wondered what he was doing there. Was he supposed to be an impartial observer or something?
I don't know, but I'm like, they're going to shoot the sheriff because he didn't bring a deputy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I kind of was frustrated with the sheriff because he didn't have any support and he wasn't smart enough to bring support with him. Instead, you've got this lynch mob. And that's what it is. It's a lynch mob. It's not these guys, good people, trying to do what's right. This is an angry mob.
Yeah. And there is not much scarier in the world than an angry mob who is convinced that they are right, and perhaps that they alone are right.
McKay has the audacity to say to Paladin, I'm sorry, Paladin, we had no way of knowing. I'm like, bro, he presented you with all kinds of evidence and asked some hard questions, and you weren't willing to deal with it because it's easier to lynch somebody and get it over with.
We had no way of knowing, but there were signs. And we ignored them.
Yeah. And the fact that Paladin doesn't punch the guy in the face right then, which is what I would have done.
He's still outnumbered.
Yeah. It's still like an incredible amount of restraint. The audacity to say to him, we had no way of knowing. There's a good old-fashioned Southern expression for that, Earl, and it's called, that's a big old crock-a-hooey.
Oh, I could think of some more colorful variations
yes, there
on
are
that
many
that are
more.
not fit for this podcast.
There are many more, but that will take you a lot longer in the editing room.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
And to that point, earlier in the episode, when Paladin is just trying to get them to listen, Curly's wanted to shut him up.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to hear any evidence.
No.
He's got his man. He's ready to get this thing over with.
The fact that the only thing that makes him turn is when Dobie tries to advise him on how to use the gun properly because this thing is broken on there. Like, that's what turns his head? It's wildly inconsistent, and I don't see, like, why that made Curly turn versus all of the evidence supported by Paladin, what Paladin had to say.
It kind of goes back to a quote that I once heard from Mel Brooks.
The great philosopher Mel Brooks.
Yes, the great American philosopher Mel Brooks, asking why, as a person of Jewish ancestry, why did he spend so much of his time making fun of the Nazis? And his response was along the lines of, the villains love to hear about themselves being described as villains, but they cannot stand the humiliation of being made out to be fools. And so in that moment, Curly knows he's been had. They all do. They were okay with, oh, we're going to go out and hang a man. And, we're going to take care of this because the law is moving too slow for us. And we are not willing to let the wheels of due process turn at their own speed. And yet, I think they know that they will be in a lot more trouble. Maybe not with the law, But in their social circle, if it gets out that, oh, yeah, we went out and hung the wrong guy and the right guy got away.
And there's an offhand comment that I missed up until the last viewing I did before we hit record. One of the Posse men, the guy who's putting together the noose, he says to Dobie, oh, this is the second killer you found this way. And I'm like, Dobie has done this before. He's killed people before, blamed it on somebody else, and depended on this lynch mob mentality so that somebody else gets the blame.
That's about the only reason I'm okay with the story ending with, we don't see it happen, but we hear Dobie get lynched.
Yeah.
In the background.
Yeah.
Very effective piece of direction. Good on you, Andy McLaughlin. That we don't see that happen. We see Paladin's reaction to it, and it's not a pretty reaction.
He says, just remember that what you do today, gentlemen, you'll deal with the rest of your life. And, I think this is an indictment of the death penalty that we see in Star Trek.
And there have been some indications in some of Gene's previous work that he's not a big fan of capital punishment. I think what we're seeing here is, in some ways, Have Gun Will Travel, at least under Gene's watch, is reaching the 60s before the calendar year does. It is addressing hot potato social topics and delivering controversial takes on them at a time before the public in general was really trained to think that way themselves. And really, that is the kernel at the heart of this, is Gene is just telling people, it doesn't have to be a lynch mob. It doesn't have to be a murder investigation, but please think for yourselves. Just something I wish everyone would do before they hit the share button on social media.
Amen. All right, Earl, can we bring this chicken home to roost?
Oh, I think all the chickens come home to roost in this one. I have lots of feelings. I feel like I've probably already said what they are, but just in case anyone missed it, for those of you just joining us, I feel strongly that Gene is trying to warn the audience about not letting mob rule take hold. And the thing is, things like the Red Scare and the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings had already found a lot of people who were willing to go along to get along. Don't rock the boat. Just do what they say. Name some people. What'll it hurt? Or, how do folks put it these days? Oh yeah, if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to worry about. Yeah. Back in episode 14 of this podcast, Norm and I were looking at the first of the 2 episodes of I Led 3 Lives, written by Gene, which was a show born of the Red Scare and, very complimentary to it. There was a quote from Gene himself that left no doubt as to what he thought of that show. He was already emerging as someone who would not support mob rule, because that boot, more often than not, comes down on the throats of the marginalized. In addition to the Red Scare, you had the Civil Rights Movement already on the scene in 1959, and people trying to tie that in somehow with their fear of communism. So, while this episode is on its surface about a posse in the Old West, that's not what it's really about. It's about the dangers of going along with a crowd that, in the name of doing good, with air quotes, they have shed any notions of fairness, kindness, or mercy, and they have stopped taking on new information. I could name recent episodes in history, and not recent episodes of television, that have shown that this is still a problem, but I trust I don't need to name the examples. I think we all know what they are. So it pays, once again, to gut check your feelings on the crowd that you've joined, because that may not be the crowd you wanted to join.
Earlier in the episode, I talked about this felt like this was Gene's treatise on how he felt about the death penalty.
Yeah.
And, I agree with you where you said this is the only way I don't feel that bad about Dobie getting strung up at the end of the episode is because it sounds like he's done this before and will do it again because he's gotten away with it.
Yeah.
So, yes, in this case, we know without a shadow of a doubt that, yes, he's the one that did this. He is getting punishment for the crime. But I think until we can, and this is me talking, if we cannot, without 100% prove that somebody did the crime and that crime deserves death, then we shouldn't do the death penalty. And I think this is ultimately the conclusion that Star Trek lands on as well.
Right. Unless you go to Talos 4.
Yeah, unless you go to Talos 4. But we're not taking people out anymore because they commit crimes.
Exactly. Even once we have conclusive evidence that Dobie has kind of made a career of this, I still feel like hanging him from a tree out in a field doesn't satisfy even the most basic outlines of due process.
Not at all.
We haven't gotten justice, we've gotten revenge. Now, what would have been really daring would have been if we cut the show off before they hang Dobie and leave a question mark over whether or not that even happens.
The other way that could kind of change the impact is if, we're going to take Dobie back to town, and he's going to have a fair hearing, and he is going to be tried not only for this, plus the attempted framing of Paladin, he's going to have to answer for this other quote-unquote killer he caught before.
Right. And, I'm sure that story still ends with him hanging from a rope, just in the town square, not from this tree out in the middle of nowhere. Nice tree, though. Good tree.
It's a good tree.
Very well selected tree. If you're going to, go to a location and shoot only in that location, good job. But they are, again, not interested in letting any of the cogs of due process turn here. And so I still don't exactly feel great about, where Dobie is at the end of the story. Well, where he is he's dead. Considering how these guys have acted through the rest of the episode, are they even going to bother to bury him?
I doubt it.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about the death penalty there. Yeah, it does feel like that has got to be at least part of what Gene is warning us about. Just the rush to judgment. Once you have a crowd that, this kind of has that bloodthirst going on, how difficult it is to get them to slow their roll and let the process that is supposed to happen.
You're talking about leaving him hanging there, and it made me think of Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday. Yeah. Although this is a different context. And
yeah, very, very different kind of leaving him hanging.
yeah, not the situations described in Strange Fruit is not the same as this by any stretch of the imagination. This is at least something akin to justice, but not justice. Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com.
On the next Gene-ology, the Golden Toad. Ribbit. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takachi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.